outpost way out in the Atlantic, across the Atlantic in the Caribbean Sea. Some Madeireans signed 2 to 4 year contracts as indentured servants. The Mediterranean type Europeans were considered more resilient than the fair-skinned North European races. Funchal, the capital of Madeira, and I happened to spend 3 weeks there last year at a conference and doing research. Funchal, it was said, had 3 times opened her jails to favor British Guyana with their contents. Sounds like Columbus when he came this way. To find enough sailors, they had to open the jail for him. Later arrivals, however, were praised as law-abiding, hard-working, and they turned out to be skilled factory artisans. Furthermore, they were the forebears of an enterprising and commercial class. But the least satisfactory workers, they soon became the most successful merchants. They achieved elite positions in society by overcoming early prejudice, outlasting other resident whites, and of course, working very, very hard, as most initial migrants do, to make a better life, not only for themselves, but for their children and grandchildren. But the Madeireans also died in very large numbers. We look now at migration, the planters' antidote to emancipation. The planters cried for more labor after abolition. The planters wanted to maintain and increase their profits. That's the reason they were here. With cheap, reliable, malleable, and disposable labor. And that's the reason why I am here. My videographer is here. The Portuguese were here. The Indians were here. The Chinese were here. Indentured labor, cheap, reliable, malleable, and disposable. You just throw it away when you finish with it. Surplus labor was brought in to keep down the wages and to provide labor control in a military fashion. The planters also sought in the Caribbean to resuscitate the abandoned plantations left by the ex-slaves. They sought to improve production on the existing plantations and to acquire and expand, develop new plantations. The Madeireans would form the nucleus of a middle class, a buffer against the ex-slaves, and they will address the black-white imbalance in the population, particularly in fear of a potential breakdown of order after emancipation. You would be familiar with the Deficiency Acts to address the black-white population in the slavery days. In the Victorian era, emphasis was put on the need for a contented middle class with its own characteristic social and moral values as the main cement of society. The presence of the Madeireans, it was hoped, would help to raise the profile of the black laborers on the estates and induce them into industrious work habits. Madeireans will also serve as an inducement to attract other Europeans as skilled estate laborers. This was the hope. the Madeireans migrate to British Guyana. In the Caribbean, most Madeireans migrated to Guyana. The wages in Guyana were 3 shillings to 4 shillings per day, as against 4 pence to 6 pence per day in Madeira. Between 1835 and 1850, 17,098 Madeirans came to British Guyana. Between 1851 and 1881, 13,535 Madeirans and 164 Azorians, that is from the nearby Azores, arrived in BG, British Guyana. We now look at the Leeward Islands. The Leeward Islands, Antigua and St. Kitts, Madeirans replaced the English laborers who had been brought there to work on the estates. Most of them succumbed to a complication of diseases or distempers. Antigua received a total of 2,527, and St. Kitts 2,085 Madeirans. More than one half of the Madeirans who came to the Caribbean died between 1831 and 1861. Initially, they were considered adequate and reliable field workers. A few Madeirans introduced to Nevis in 1847 died shortly thereafter, and the survivors went in search of higher wages on more prosperous shores. The worldwide cholera epidemic of 1853 to 1854, quite similar to our present-day international COVID-19 experience. This cholera epidemic reduced the former slave population in the islands. 3,290 persons died in St. Kitts. In Nevis, 961 died. Replacements were needed, and Nevis would later receive a few Madeirans in 1881. Let us look now at the Windward Islands. From 1845 to 1850, 2,102 Madeirans arrived in St. Vincent, providing a reservoir of sugarcane workers. English planters started to prefer them to the blacks, and some Madeirans served as estate foremen, charge hands, overseers, drivers, which were high status, well-paid jobs. They entered the hierarchy of the skinocracy at a higher level than blacks. The skinocracy, of course, means white skin at the top of the pyramid, black skin at the bottom, and so it goes. Their middle-class job status and the accompanying compensation allowed the Madeirans to earn and save sufficient money, which enabled their entry into shopkeeping and small cottage industries. Grenada received 601 Madeirans and Dominica 164. We look now at St. Vincent. The The annual report of 1847 indicated that a few Portuguese had begun petty businesses near the estates. From 1850, Madeirans emerged as rural and urban businessmen trading in the peasant and village communities on the periphery of the estates. They left the estates as soon as the opportunity arose. The Madeirans became social middlemen, a buffer between the elite white merchants and planters and the black peasants. But many Madeirans remained sugarcane laborers. In St. Vincent, there was very high mortality. Major epidemics swept the island. Smallpox in 1849, yellow fever in 1852, cholera, as we said, 1853, 1854 hit all the islands of the Caribbean. And then St. Vincent had a whooping cough epidemic in 1865. Madeiran migration gradually declined in importance as planters and estate owners did not require this type of indentured labor. Indians and Chinese indentured laborers were imported into the Caribbean in larger numbers as a result. We now look at some photographs of a Portuguese family, businessmen, and shops in BG, British Guyana. Madeirans in Trinidad. About 3,000 Madeirans migrated to Trinidad between 1834 and 1882. In 1846, death and disease took its toll. Malaria, scarlet fever, yellow fever, smallpox, dysentery, and other diseases wiped out many, and many more died over the years. The survivors, some of them opened dry goods stores where they made a significant contribution to the economic life of Trinidad. A large number of the Madeiran migrants in Trinidad were Protestants, not Roman Catholics. They fled from persecution and their missionary in Madeira was John Cully from the United Kingdom. In Trinidad, the Madeirans soon learned English, started to educate their children at schools, both in Trinidad and overseas. And they quickly moved into the professions, the civil service throughout the Caribbean. By the early 1880s, Madeiran families were sending their children to universities abroad. Let's look now at the table, early migrants, Trinidad. Again, we will just look at the highest numbers. The ships that came, the Watchful, the Tralhista, the Everetta, the Portland, the Senator, the William, the Piru, and so on, the Dalhousie. 1834, 44 males. 1846 and 1847, 1,250 Madeirans came to Trinidad. Thank you very much for listening. It's a pleasure to talk to you.